Do you want to stay more focused on the right goals in your life, or even just figure out what the right goals are for you? Do you want clarity? Do you want better work-life balance? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to Success Through Failure.
Welcome to the Success Through Failure podcast, the show that reveals failure as your path to success. You'll listen to intriguing interviews with some of the most successful people on the planet and learn how their failures became a launchpad for success and how yours can too. Here's your host, former Division I All-American wrestler, former Division I head coach, speaker, and personal coach, Jim Harshaw.
Welcome to another episode of Success Through Failure. Today, I bring you Nell Daly. Nell is a practicing psychotherapist, journalist, TV commentator for Fox and CNN on mental health and politics, and host of the podcast titled Unscripted, and she's a mother of three. Nell is an alum of Trinity College and has a Master's of Fine Arts from Columbia University and a second Master's in Social Work from NYU. She has postgraduate training in reproductive psychiatry and has attended Harvard University and has completed psychoanalytic training from the esteemed Washington Square Institute in New York City. Communication, mental health, politics, and sex. So let's dive in. As usual, if you don't have time to listen to the entire episode, or if you hear something you like but don't have time to write it down, be sure to grab your free copy of the action plan. Just go to jimharshawjr.com/action. Now, typically when I do these interviews, I read this bio and I have the guests right there waiting. But usually right when I make the Skype call, we end up chatting for a couple of minutes before I say, okay, hey, we're going to hit the record button here. Well, Nell and I started chatting and there was some really good stuff. So right midstream conversation, I said, hey, listen, I'm just going to hit the record button. And we kind of start from scratch. So we get a running start on this one. Because I know a lot of these interviews, sometimes they can just come across, a little bit, I don't know if they come across stiff or not. I just know that sometimes I have these great conversations off air and I want to stop doing that. I want to make sure the guest is just as authentic and real with you as they are with me. And that definitely is the case here with Nell. So here we go, hitting the ground running.
Yeah.
All right. So we're just jumping into this conversation because we're talking about sports and I just want to keep it like this. I don't want to, this is my interviews are more informal and conversational. So, but yeah, we're talking about swimming and, I was a wrestler and the grind of wrestling, but being a swimmer, it's more rewarding than fun. But, I was an All-American. I achieved at a certain level. I certainly failed at achieving my goals. I mean, my goals were much higher, but how do you feel about that now? I mean, you look back and you didn't probably, most athletes don't achieve their goals. Like 99% of them don't achieve their goals. But I mean, how do you look back on it now? I mean, this point in your life, I mean, you find the benefits and you think there are rewards from that experience, like you said, of suffering?
I think, look, I didn't enjoy getting up into a cold pool at 4 or 5 in the morning, right? It sucked for so many years. And I look back at all the hours and I think, with kids now these days, I think it's better to sort of, I'm a psychotherapist, right? So I work with a lot of kid athletes and young athletes. And I think it's better to have sort of a well-rounded kid until they really have to specialize, because I think sometimes, and you've seen it with really amazing athletes, they spend so much time doing that one thing that they lose out on developing other parts of their personality or their lives. And you talk about that in the TED Talk. Like, you cut out so much of other parts of your life just to make sure that you could try to achieve this goal.
Yeah.
So I look back at my life now and I think, okay, I was always still pretty social. I was the one who was like out way too late and then like on the block the next morning in college, like still trying to swim. But I look back now and again, it's the ability to handle stress. Mm-hmm. It's the ability to sort of dig deep. And when I meet people who aren't athletes, sometimes I wonder, because they just weren't brought up in a family where that was the culture. And, I shouldn't say this in a blanket statement, but I do think that athletes can draw so much strength from having gone through hours and hours of someone telling them what to do when they don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. Right? That's like healthy. Like, we sometimes have to be told what to do and have discipline and work really hard at something.
There's growth that happens there.
Yeah, there's a lot of growth and a lot of letting go of your ego and putting your faith in somebody else. And I think it's just the ability to handle a ton of stress. My sadness about looking back on my athletic years is that between the ages of like, once you stop sports, there was a time in my life for about 10 years where I sort of lost the lesson of it. Like I stayed fit.
Yeah, me too.
But as a mom, like I never had to really like dig deep necessarily into that like athletic coaching. And it's weird because as a psychotherapist, I do a lot of coaching, but I have just now over the past like 3 or 4 years, as I've finished having kids and gone back into like doing a lot of training, that I really missed intensely for 10 years having a coach, you know, and it's so interesting because that's what you do now. You coach. And I think as an athlete, we think, oh, we just get coached when we're kids doing a sport. But really, as an adult now, so many of the people in the podcasting world and in sort of the media world that I'm in, that's what I want to coach. Like, I want coaches. I want a tribe of coaches all the time.
Yeah.
And you said something really interesting in the TED Talk about this, because it only takes one person believing in you. And sometimes those people are not your family and friends.
Sure.
Right?
Absolutely. I talked about the one guy who believed in me. I had some other people who believed in me, but this one guy who planted this, John McGovern, I've talked about him on my podcast before, but he planted this seed into my head. As a matter of fact, so I'll tell you this quick story. Now, I wrestled a guy named Lincoln McElravy. So for the wrestling people listening, they know who Lincoln McElravy. He was a 3-time national champion, 1-time runner-up. He actually lost 1 year in the finals, got upset. World silver medalist. And John had convinced me, my coach had convinced me that I was going to beat this guy. This was this guy's senior year. I mean, this guy was unbeaten. He was unstoppable. I was a sophomore. He's a senior, like 2 different worlds. And John had convinced me that I was going to beat this guy, right? He was that voice that convinced me that I'm going to win. So I stepped onto the mat, not just believing Nell, but actually knowing for a fact I'm going to beat this guy. So I stepped on the mat and I got destroyed. I got demolished, right? But I walked off the mat, and this was such a turning point in my life, because I walked off the mat and I realized the only chance that I had was if I believed. That was my only chance. And so it didn't hurt me to believe. It took my chances from like 1 in 1,000 to like 1 in 100, right?
Right.
So like 10x my chance.
Odds.
It gave me better odds. Absolutely. Yeah. And so I took that same lesson into the very next match that I had to wrestle. I had to wrestle the guy ranked 6th in the country, who I'd never beaten anybody ranked that high at that point in my career. And I beat the guy, you know, because I realized, you know what, it didn't hurt me to believe that I was going to beat the last guy, and I lost. But so I'm going to carry that same attitude into this next match. And that was such a turning point in my wrestling career and in my life. So, yeah.
Just sort of knowing that if I can go in believing something.
Sure.
Yeah.
Self-belief can't hurt you. I mean, I guess in certain circumstances are good, but like theoretically, in most instances, in sports, in life, in business, believing in yourself is a tool. It's an asset.
Well, right. And I think that's the whole point of your podcast. I mean, really, in the end, all of these things that we're talking about come down, for me at least, to a spiritual perspective, right? We're human beings on this planet trying to learn lessons to evolve. And so how we do it is interesting, right? You do it through sports, through your job, through your family life. But failure, essentially, no matter in what arena you're trying, deepens your process. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. It makes you hit your knees and go, okay, like, what am I made of here? And I loved how you talked about Abe Lincoln, especially the fact that he had a nervous breakdown before he became president. I had forgotten that fact.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's crazy. It's crazy, right? Because, I mean, we all struggle to get out of bed some mornings. I talked about this with Nihi Sobo, who runs a podcast recently. Yeah, I talked with him about it. And I was like, dude, I struggle still. Like, as much as I do this work and I help other people, there's days I struggle to get out of bed. And you have to kind of remember that the bigger picture is all the failures are just there to kind of make you hit your knees and in prayer, meditation, whatever your higher power is, and dig deep and say, okay, what do I need to learn from this experience and how do I need to move forward from it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really my mission. That's become my mission. So since I did that TED Talk, and that was just kind of placed on my heart in a moment, I was literally driving to work one day, and I heard this opening for the TEDx event in Charlottesville, which is one of the biggest ones. It's like in the top 1% of biggest TED events in the world. And I applied, and long story short, I got there, and but it was just sort of planted in me. I'm like, that's my message about failure, because we all look at people and we think they're successful, like they don't experience fail. Like Abraham Lincoln, arguably the greatest or one of the greatest leaders in the history of our country, he had a hard time getting out of bed some mornings, right? To the point where he had a nervous breakdown. We think like, all of our blemishes, all of our flaws, all of our failures, all of our adversity and setbacks and reasons why we can't, we think they are just that. They're excuses. They're reasons why we can't, but those are normal. They're part of success. They're part of success, and they're part of everybody's life. It's something you have to learn to deal with and face and overcome. And then I believe you get coaches in your life. You get people who can help you, whether they're coaches like I do. I am sort of like an executive coach and a personal coach, or like what you do. I mean, you're doing coaching, as a practicing psychotherapist, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think left to our own devices, left to our own heads, we will take ourselves out of the game. So often, if when we fail, we don't have a coach saying, no. You can sit back now and you can lick your wounds and you can reevaluate, and we can sort of map out what went wrong, but then it's about getting back up and trying again.
Yeah.
And every really successful person that I speak to doing all these interviews, and I do a lot of journalism as well, like on CNN and Fox, stuff like that. Every really successful person says that they are able to just take a failure and sort of, I don't want to say shrug it off, but what's really fascinating about them is that they're just like, well, I just kind of was like, okay, what do I learn from that? And I have a really wonderful family. And so I kind of went home and I sat at my desk and I was like, all right, well, I'm going to apply to this publishing company, or maybe I'm going to self-publish that book, or maybe I'm going to call this agent. So I think so much of it is just about staying open through the failure. And also, again, realizing that in our lives, we're going to go through multiple, what I call Phoenix processes. Do you know what the Phoenix process is?
No.
So the phoenix is this bird, right? It's this Greek myth. It's incredible. And it's this beautiful bird. And every 2,000 years, it literally builds its own funeral pyre. And it sits in the flames, and it lights a match, and it lights itself on fire, and it burns itself down to ashes. And then after it sits in the ashes for a little while, it comes back bigger and more beautiful. And it takes the ashes and flies them up to the seat of God. And I just love this metaphor, because if I was brave enough, I'd tattoo a little phoenix bird on the inside of my wrist, because so much of life is about that process, like that constant to evolve. We have to fail. We have to go through a phoenix process. Sometimes life burns it down for us. Sometimes life burns us up, right? We lose a job, we lose a family member, our marriages don't work out, financial stuff happens. Or sometimes we do it to ourselves, because we just like get a feeling, like a knocking at our soul, that something big really needs to change in our lives. And sometimes evolution doesn't happen without destruction. Growth doesn't happen without failure. So,
yeah, well said. Evolution doesn't happen without destruction. So
no, it can't.
The people that I talk to on a regular basis, the people that I coach, and people that I kind of prospects and other folks that I talk to, they struggle most with just that, with figuring out like what's next for me. So many people feel out of balance with where they're at right now. They're not balancing their work life and their family life and everything in their life. They're professional, they have sort of desires in their career that sometimes they feel like, or maybe they are conflicting with their family life and their personal life. And they just don't know what to do next. They feel stuck. There's the quote by Thoreau. It says, the masses of men lead lives of quiet desperation.
Oh yeah. Oh,
right.
We've all been there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's not happening fast enough. We can't move that ball. Like, we're trying so hard to climb the hill, and we're like, oh my God, 6 months later, a year later, why have I not achieved these goals? And that's really hard, especially for type A people who are used to saying, like, you in your TED talk, you said, I worked for 3 years. There was nothing else I could do. I could not work any harder to achieve this goal. That must have been so frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. And you feel you feel weak and you feel hopeless and helpless, and you feel like it must be easier for other people because I see them doing it, but why can't I do it? And so let me ask you this now. You're a practicing psychotherapist. Do you coach people? Do you work with people through that sort of thing, or is it more people with mental health issues?
I do. What happened to me is I started my private practice. I have a private practice on Fifth Avenue in New York City. I started it over 10 years ago. And so my practice at the beginning started very much with treating a general population. But interestingly enough, as like the years evolved, and a lot of women, as the years evolved, more and more executive men started coming to me, which was fascinating. And I couldn't figure it out why for a little while. So I see a lot of what I call C-suite men. And it's been an amazing journey for me, because listening to those guys who are, as you know, like uber successful, I get to hear what's inside their souls. I get to ask them their secrets to success. I get to help them move to the next level if they need it. It's been amazing. It's been an amazing. I'm so privileged to do the work that I do. And so yeah, I do a lot of coaching to like people who get a lot of coaching, or like have already become very successful.
Sure. And so let's go down that line of thinking a little bit. You talk about a lot of things that most people are uncomfortable talking about. Things like communication and sex and mental health and other topics. So let's start with communication, because I think that's where a lot of people's relationships break down, whether they're professional or personal. But we communicate every day, and that's what makes humans humans. That's what sets us apart. But why are people so bad at communicating?
Are you talking about in relationships in general?
Yeah,
like in our closest relationships.
Sure,
right?
Let's go with our closest.
Let's say like our marriages with our families. Yeah.
Yep.
I think that what happens sometimes when two people are together for a long period of time, they stop looking at each other as if the other person is an individual, and you start seeing just a caricature of the other person of what you want to see. So I don't know how long you've been married. How long have you been married?
Almost 14 years.
Almost 14 years. Okay. Yeah. So I was married, I think I'm divorced now, which was not, you asked, it was so funny because one of the questions that you asked me before we got on the show was, what's some of your biggest failures? I'm like, oh, dude, I've had so many. And I always tell my patients, make peace with failure, because once you do, you're a lot happier. You know what I mean? Like, you just got to keep making peace with it.
Oh, and I'm going to ask you that on the recording here too, because we were talking off the recording. So now we're going to record that answer when you're done.
Yeah, I mean, I've like done, and when you get divorced, is like one of a New York sort of Fifth Avenue psychotherapist. You have to think long and hard about how that's going to look marketing wise.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
But here's the thing. I think that in marriages, we often, how often do you come home and you look at your wife after 14 years and say, how are you?
Not enough.
How are you?
I was thinking about
like,
that.
Not about how is she? Like, not in regards to the family or in regards to your relationship, just like, what's going on in your head?
Yeah.
Like, how are you doing?
How was your day? But
like, how are you doing right now? Like, is this like the place you thought your life was going to be? Is this how you wanted it to turn out? We so often don't look at our partners as individuals. I think we get into a lot of arguments about trying to control other people and their behavior. And it's unfortunate because it doesn't have to be that way. But I think to have really amazing communication between two people, you really got to work on your own ego. And you really, so much of communication is simply just about listening to the other person and being non-reactive, right? So oftentimes we get into these patterns of communication where they say something that might be critical, you get defensive, and you go down that road over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, you got to work on yourself. And every successful entrepreneur, successful businessman I've had in my office, every rock star that I've interviewed over the last few years, they all meditate. And I can't believe it, one after the other. And I just got into meditation a year ago. I have to laugh because I'm like an accidental spiritualist. Like, I didn't mean to get into all this stuff. Like, it just was part of one of my Phoenix processes was to like go down this road, and I'm super curious. But the thing that meditation does in terms of it being related to communication is when you meditate every day, when you have a daily meditation practice, it slows your response time down. It creates space in your own head. So when you actually hear someone say something to you, you're less sensitive to react right away. And you're more open to just taking the information in and going, okay, that's interesting. And if you can just slow down reaction times in communication, it's amazing what that can open up in terms of intimacy between two people.
Yeah, I believe it. I've interviewed a lot of successful people on this podcast, and I always ask, what's something you do that you feel has set you apart? And so many have said meditation, and others have said things that I put under the category of I call it a productive pause, and I've given it a definition. It's a short period of focused reflection around specific questions that leads to clarity of action and peace of mind. Mm-hmm. And it's just this moment of getting off the treadmill of life, because we're all on the treadmill of life, and we're going. And then every once in a while we look up, and usually we don't, but in those times when we do look up, we're like, man, where am I at? And how did I get here? And how did I miss that? You kind of look in hindsight and you see things that you missed. But in meditation is something now that I have not been able to get into. So I downloaded the Headspace app.
Yeah.
And I did the 10 days. It's like 10 days, and I did 10 days straight, and I was like, kind of liked it, but I couldn't get into it. I mean, what was the switch that worked for you? I mean, or some of the folks that you work with?
Well, first of all, I love what you said about this pause. Yeah. That's for me, I call that looking at the macro picture, right? So people who have the ability, and that's a psycho-spiritual practice, right? It's just to step back and sort of float up above your life in a sense and look at it in terms of a big picture and say, okay, what's going on here? Like, where do I need to, that successful people are very good at looking at the macro picture and stepping off that hamster wheel. Mm-hmm. And meditation sucks when you first start. It's so hard. You can't, but it's so cute because you said, I did it for 10 days. And then I was like, if I said I'm going to learn how to wrestle and I went to 10 workouts with you and I was like, I'm not very good at this, wouldn't you be like, of course you're not good at it. You just did it for 10 days.
But I was hoping to get some kind of spark or enjoy. I kind of enjoyed it, I guess, during those 10 days. But I don't know. Yeah, it just didn't work.
It's not, no. It's not about enjoying it. Come on, you're an athlete.
Yeah,
you know this.
That's true. I didn't enjoy wrestling, but I was,
that's right. That's going back to that whole immediate gratification. I'm an American. Give me a cheeseburger because I'm hungry, and let me sit on social media because it, distracts me from what other stuff I have to do in my life. No. Meditation is work. It's a psycho-spiritual practice, and it can make your anxiety worse before things get better. But it's essential not only does it have enormous health benefits that we know of, right? It can lower your cortisol and it calms down your parasympathetic nervous system. And it also, though, they think opens up sort of this spot in your prefrontal lobe. And here's the thing. We all can sit here and say, we don't understand so much about the human mysteries of life. And one of the things that people in my field are really starting to focus on, and people at the forefront of technology and medicine and science and research, is how does consciousness affect our health? How does consciousness affect our success? And when you meditate, you're tapping into your subconscious self. So if you have clients who come into you and say, I don't really know what I'm doing, or I don't know what path I'm going to be on, they can only talk out so much. Part of the work that they need to do is they need to sit in deep reflection and really figure out, and whether you're spiritual or not, what is your soul longing to do? What's that expression? And how are you going to get there? And you can only, I think, figure that out in sort of quiet meditation.
Yeah.
And that leads to once you figure that out, once you hear that voice, that leads to a sense of prana. And I noticed on your blog, you talk about, how do we get the energy to do the things that we do? Well, you and I both know that when we're doing things that we love, we feel like endless energy. Mm-hmm. And so in other parts of the world, we call that prana. And when you're living off of prana, sort of this really this is going to fill my soul. This is the right path that I'm supposed to be on. This is why I'm here on this earth. There's nothing like it. And you don't even have to dig that deep for the energy. It's just coming out of you.
Yeah.
Does that answer?
Absolutely. I mean, it's, similar to probably in some ways the flow state. There was a great book called Flow, written about that, about getting into that state where, where we talk about time flies, and I think a lot of people don't live.
He's a wonderful positive psychologist out in California. He's a wonderful guy, and he's written some really great books. And the positive psychologists, those who started like the whole positive psychology, the forefront of that thinking, which is a lot of what our coaching is based off of, at Harvard, at UPenn, out at the UC schools. I think they were writing those books before meditation became more popular, before we brought it over more from the East. A lot of people, started doing meditation just because yoga became really popular in this country for good reason. And so I think now we can take the flow state and sort of up it by saying, how do we get into that flow state even quicker? Not necessarily always by doing like a bunch of things that we should be doing, but just simply through meditation.
Sure.
So I suggest for me, it always takes about 40 days to make a habit.
40. Okay.
40. Yes. And so I would say you've got to go back, and we should do like a test, and I'm going to say like, I'm going to do a meditation challenge on you, and you're going to start tomorrow, and we're going to hook back up in 40 days. And I want to see what's changed in your life in 40 days and your relationships just because you did it. And look, I'm not perfect at it. There's days I skip it. If you get really into it and you drop it, your anxiety will go through the roof.
Okay. So let me ask you this. So, when I'm going through, like when I did the 10 days on Headspace, it was about sort of clearing your mind and just sort of being aware of you and of your body and of your surroundings for that time. So I wasn't thinking about my life or my business or my job or my relationship or my kids or anything like that, right? Is that what the aim is?
People ask me this all the time. Like I say, you've got to meditate. They come into my office and I say, listen, I'll work with you, but you've got to start meditating. And they'll come back in the next week and they'll go, I'm really bad at it. Like I was thinking about sex the whole time, or like whether or not I should break up with my girlfriend, or, like the promotion I really want. And that's cool. Like, that's okay. Like, everyone's so uptight. I mean, how uptight are we as people that we think we're meditating wrong when it's meditation? You know what I mean? So I think it's just about when you start. Look, I can't meditate. Like TM, people who do transcendental meditation.
Yeah, one of my clients does that.
I can't do that. There's no music. I would go crazy. I'd be talking to the guy next to me, I'd be like checking my cell phone. I'm way too ramped up for that. I have to do it to breath work, right? I have to do it to a mantra. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big fan of Kundalini meditation, where there's just a mantra and you're sort of like breathing in with the music and breathing out with the music. And it's through the breath that, your mind is going to fill up with all kinds of things, especially in the first week or two of doing it. But what's incredible, and I've never had a patient tell me anything different, by like week 3, they can sink right into the meditation, and it's amazing. Your head just clears right away.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that helped answer your question.
Yeah, that answered my question. And I'm going to set some kind of meditation goal. That's going to be one of my health goals. That I set. So, okay. So, I want to switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
Mental health. Yeah. That's a topic. It's another sort of hard to discuss topic. There's a lot of sort of drugs and prescriptions around mental health. Yeah. What's your take on that? And my wife's a licensed therapist, so I kind of get a little bit of I get a lot of interesting information from her and what she does, and I've been really educated on it through her. And just, we all, I think, know people who are mentally ill in our lives. It's in some way, shape, or form. So my eyes have been really open to that in recent years. But what are some of your thoughts on? It's a pretty broad question, but
I have very clear thoughts on this. So here's my deal. I was part of the system for many, many years, the conventional system. I have 2 master's degrees, one from Columbia, one from NYU. I've been a professor there, and I was taught to diagnose and basically prescribe. About half the people I would suggest, okay, maybe a prescription would be a good idea. When we were growing up, I'm 41. How old are you?
41. Yeah, same.
41 too. Right. Okay. So when we were growing up, right, like Prozac didn't really exist. Like it was just like Prozac Nation had just come out. People weren't on Adderall like they are now. Like your friends were like snorting it and like at parties and stuff.
Sure.
But that was like as good as it got, right? Like nobody was like, I don't know about you, but like I didn't have tons of friends on Ritalin.
No.
I certainly didn't have anybody, drinking and taking benzodiazepines, which is what we call bars now. I don't know if you know. I'm sure down at University of Virginia they talk about this to the students because that's become like a really popular way to party. So 80 million Americans are on psychiatric medications at this point in the country. 1 out of every 4 women is on an antidepressant during her childbearing years.
Wow.
So if 1 out of every 4 women is on medication in this country, not only does that affect their libido in a huge way, but are we really all that sad? Like okay, so if we all need, let's just assume we all need that medication. What's our society doing wrong that's making women so miserable that we're trying to medicate our moods every day? Mm-hmm. So I about 2 years ago, like had a real kind of hit my knees, look in the mirror about how I was part of this system and felt pretty sick and felt pretty ashamed that I didn't question the paradigm. And I became a holistic psychotherapist. So I'm part of like green psychiatry now. The other thing that was happening in my field, over the last 10 years is a huge leaps and bounds in terms of nutrition. And as an athlete, like, right, I grew up on processed food. Like my mom made like Celeste's frozen pizza and I never smelled garlic in my house. Like that was the time. It was the 80s. Like, we didn't have Whole Foods, right?
No.
There was no such thing as like, we didn't know what a GMO is. Now my field still in academia, I find in some ways really disruptive and amazing, but also can be really slow to catch up. And in my field, we have not found a program that really combines people who are studying nutrition and mental health. And I think with the right diet, you can change so much of the anxiety and depression that people feel on a daily basis, along with combining with psychospiritual practices. So that's why I started Unscripted, the podcast. I really sort of wanted an outlet to look at big pharma and to say, okay, how can I give people this information that I think is really key? Because I think one of the biggest human travesties of our time is the over-medication of our society. It's led to huge rates of addiction in terms of heroin, right? The gateway drug to heroin is painkillers. Wow. I think I think it was like 13 million prescriptions of opiates were written in this country alone last year.
Wow.
So we've never seen a bigger heroin problem in this country. And then again, with our young people, they're all becoming very, very addicted to the benzodiazepines, which are very life-threatening. They drink on them. And I see a lot of kids in Fairfield and in New York, in Fairfield County in New York where I live, who are coming out of rehabs because they're really addicted to Xanax and Klonopin and those kinds of medications. So that was why I started Unscripted. And I think the other issue for mental health for me that I see, the biggest thing is with men, right? I really see like the rates of suicide are rising for men. And I'm sure you coach you do coach more men than women?
Yes.
Yeah. I think in this country, like it's so amazing the work that you do because I think men really don't have an outlet. Like women have each other. We have our tribe. But I think for men, they don't, and they're really isolated and they need to hook up with people like you. They need to get into therapy if they're struggling or just need to find like a coach. If it doesn't even have to be like a mental health issue. Not all my patients have like necessarily like quote unquote mental health issues. They just need somebody to be able to talk to because I think we still talk about people we don't allow to fail. It's men in our culture still. Mm-hmm. There's so much pressure still for men to be the ones who are financially providing for our families. There's less jobs out there. It's harder to make a buck than it's ever been. They're under an enormous amount of financial stress. And to handle that financial stress because they don't have an outlet, they drink. Obviously there's reckless behavior involved and it wreaks havoc on family lives and on their children. And a lot of these guys don't want to break up their families. That's the amazing thing, right? Men are awesome. Like a lot of them want to keep their little clan together, but they don't have a way to manage a lot of their stress and anxiety.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just men are in a situation where we can't show vulnerability. We can't show that we're weak. We have to be strong and we have to provide. And it's a hard thing to do. I mean, it's a hard thing to do. And it's so interesting. The guys that come to me, they, when we do these sort of group sessions that we do, they're like 4 to 8 week group sessions, some of these. And whenever I do those ones, the guys, they stick together. Even after we're done working together, some of these guys, they still call each other and they're still friends, and they've made friends sort of from across the country. And it's fascinating how much we need that. And they don't have anybody in their lives who they can talk to like they talk to me, and I'm not, I'm not doing the deep work that someone trained like yourself can do, but there's nobody in their lives that they can talk to like they can talk to me. And it fills me to be a resource for somebody like that. But it's a very much needed resource for all men, I think. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sometimes it's easier, like guys who are friends, like, I when I was married, or the guys I've dated after I've been married, they'll go play golf with their guy friends. And I'm like, oh my God, how's your friend? And they're like, good. Yeah. They're like, what you guys talking about? I'm like, right. Oh my God, talked about like sports and stuff. Yeah. It's so surface, right? Oh yeah, it is. Because again, like even with your closest guy friends, it's really rare to have one that you feel like over beer, you can be like, oh my God. I did a podcast with the girl who runs a sex podcast named Emily. She runs a podcast called Sex with Emily. And she was like, yeah, no guys over beers are like, oh my God, I'm having like, I don't know how PG you want to keep this podcast. That's fine. Go ahead. But like erectile dysfunction. And like, what do I do about it? They come to me. And I think one of the reasons I've had a lot of success with the men I've worked with is because I grew up in a family where I had older brothers. And I had a really like tough Irish American dad from the projects of South Boston. And so I grew up with very, very alpha men. And so I'm able to get these alpha guys in my office, and I'm not intimidated by them, and I'm going to call them on their BS. And I want to get to the real work and like what's really going on with them, because they want to improve, they want their lives to improve. They want to feel better. So kudos to you. Like you got to keep up the work. It's the guys. It's women, even though a lot of women obviously were upset that a woman didn't become president last November, we pretty much showed we had a tribe down looking at the Women's March, right? Sure. Like women have like found their tribe. Yes. Do we have a ways to go to break down some glass ceilings? Absolutely. And I will I'll be head of that charge to make sure women start getting paid equally and we have the same opportunities and access to resources. But it's men. It is men in this country that I really think are struggling. And we cannot forget those guys across the aisle. Yeah. So let me ask you this now, as we wrap up in the next few minutes. Yeah. What's an action that the listener can take in the next, let's say, 24 to 48 hours to start moving towards broadly say a better life? Like I said, a lot of the folks that I talk to, they're not clear on what's next for them. They feel out of balance. They don't have clear goals. And they certainly don't have someone who they can actually talk to about this stuff. So what's like one thing that's really concrete they can do the next 24 to 48 hours? Right. Okay. So again, I would have answered this question by saying the first thing, obviously I'm going to say, and I'm going to keep pounding it home. I'm like the doctor who always said, like, eat your green vegetables. I think you got to meditate. Yeah. Right. If you want to find out what your soul's purpose is in this life, you've got to actually take the time out of our incredibly busy lives to figure that out, right? You can't expect to talk that out. That comes from like a much deeper place. Marc Chagall has this amazing quote that I have on my inspiration board. And it's, if I create from the heart, nearly everything works. If I create from the head, almost nothing. So how do you sink into your heart-centered space? That's one of the easiest ways to do it, is to be in quiet meditation. The second thing I want to say, and again, I'm going to go super spiritual here on you, no matter what your religious beliefs are. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Like, Amen. Sit with that for 24 hours and be like, oh my God, I am really type A. I am like as type A. I was running at 5:30 this morning. I have 3 kids. I run 2 private practices. I'm on television. I have a podcast. I am so type A. And I have to sit with that quote every morning, because when things don't work out my way, I don't like it so much. Yeah.
Right?
And so many times we can look back in our lives and say, yeah, I had a plan and that plan didn't work out, but great things came from it. And sometimes we can see that. Sometimes we can't actually see it, but it happens plenty of times.
I always tell my patients, if, everything happens for a reason. And if you don't believe that, we'll make a good reason out of the things that happen.
Yeah, that's great.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's one, to sit with that sort of idea that, okay, every door shut, as you said in the TED Talk, is a door open, like another door opens. And I happen to really firmly believe in the core of my bones that there is a bigger plan for everybody out there, that there's a big universal thing going on here that we don't really understand. And sometimes you just have to stop getting in the way of yourself and let the universe flow through you.
Yeah.
Right? Don't drive like so white knuckled on the steering wheel. Like, just ease up a little bit and see what needs to move through you to be in service to something bigger than yourself. Because in the end, ultimately, that's what's going to feel really good as you look back on your life. So that's one of the things. The other thing I would always say, and I'm bad at this, is write it down. Like, write it down. Like, everyone says, like, to manifest, you have to change. You have to like put it like literally on paper. Some of the greatest thinkers that I've dealt with, some of the most successful guys. I know one guy who writes down like the 5 things he has to get done that day. And he keeps it in his, like a CEO of a company, keeps it like in his little suit pocket. And he tries not to talk to anybody until like noon, until those 5 things are done. Yeah. I've heard Sheryl Sandberg, who's the COO of Facebook, say, you have to ruthlessly prioritize. And so, I think every morning I have my plan, and then as the day goes, I just start to prioritize that list over and over and over again. So you have to be really flexible. And then I think, I think that one of the things you have to realize is that shit takes hard work. I hate to swear, but it's true, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're struggling and you don't kind of know what to do in the next 24 hours, like, you might have to like own up to the fact that stuff takes discipline. Like, you didn't become such a good wrestler just because you naturally came out that way. You worked at it.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to work at stuff with very little resources. But I was on that run this morning thinking to myself, you just got to keep showing up every day.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to keep showing up. It doesn't always feel good. It doesn't always make me quote unquote happy, but I don't want to be happy in this life. I want to be moved.
Yeah.
Right. I want to feel the full emotional spectrum of my capabilities. And that doesn't always exist on just like the high notes of life. That also exists on the low notes. And so those are my sort of words of wisdom.
And that goes back to the core mission of this podcast, and the core mission of myself now is to educate people that failure is normal, that struggle is normal, that we want success today and now, but it's gonna be so much harder than the other person, than the next door neighbor who's already there. It's so much harder than they make it look, because you don't see when they're up at 5:30 in the morning out for a run. You don't see when they're up late. You don't see when they fail and they make a sales call and they get all these 10 no's in a row before they get a maybe. We don't see that. And that's the normal process of success. And so with that in mind, Nell, I'm not going to let you off the hook. I want to hear about this. I want to hear about, and I ask every one of my guests this.
Oh boy.
Tell me about a time that you failed. Tell me about a time where you failed, and as a result, you felt that hopelessness, that overwhelming self-doubt that just comes with failure. And because, you're a very successful person. You're all over television. You have just a huge following, and you're very successful. And it's so easy for us to look at somebody like you and say, it was just easy for her, for one reason or another. It was just a sort of straight path to the top. Yeah. But it's different for me. So tell us about a time where you failed.
Well, I just want to say, I'm just going to go back to something. You just said success is normal. I would say success is necessary. I mean, I'm sorry. You said failure is normal. Failure is normal. I would say failure is necessary. And I wake up every morning and I try to have this attitude. Some days I'm better than others. Bring it. Bring on the failure. Dude, bring it. Because it's going to happen anyway. So I'm going to eat it like I asked for it. Yeah, right? Awesome. It's just you have to just sort of get down and dirty with failure. Also, I think it's really important for people to realize that human beings have this ability we have this desire, this really strong desire to be black and white thinkers. So many people make this mistake, right? And I do this all the time too. We slip into this habit of, if I'm failing at something in my career, it means like my whole life is a failure. So I get in my car and I drive to go do errands, or I'm taking my kids to lacrosse practice, or I'm commuting on the train. And if this one thing in my work isn't going well, I get really down about my entire life.
Yeah.
Where I don't compartmentalize. You have to think of your life as like a house, and there's different rooms in the house. And sometimes some rooms are really neat and clean and feel great to be in, and other rooms don't feel that awesome. So I think you have to worry about trying not to to try not to be a black and white thinker about everything that's going on in your life. Oh my God, I'm in the middle of failure right now. I'm always in the middle of failure. That's
Tell us
how
about
I look at it. I mean, okay, geez, well, pick a category. I'll give you one of my biggest ones. So,
okay.
And this is amazing. So I have an MFA in creative writing from Columbia, which is, if anyone's in that world knows what that is like to get into that kind of program. And I got in when I was quite young and did it. And so I have this dream to publish a book. And after I did a TEDx talk 2 years ago, I was signed by a big lit agent. And we worked on 2 book proposals together. And the lit agent signed me. And after 7 months of working on these book proposals, she called me and she said, listen, I think one might get sold. The other one might not even get that much of an advance if it does get sold. But we could send these out. And I was like, oh my God, 7 months of not being around my kids, of giving my kids to my ex-husband, of not having a social life, of pouring my heart and soul into these 2 books. And she basically was like, they're not going the way we expected.
Wow.
And so I pulled back on the project. I said, you know what? Fine. I need 6 months off. And I took 6 months off, which led into like a year. And last summer I started writing again. I wrote an entirely new book. And that's the Phoenix process. Sometimes you just have to burn the whole thing down. I took the 2 first ones and I put them aside. They were a year's worth of work. And I wrote an entirely new one. And I gave it to her in November. And she said, I had no idea you were working on this. She goes, I don't believe in any of this stuff. I was like, oh my God.
Wow.
So there you go again. I was like,
Yeah.
Oh my God. So recently, she called me last week and she said, or a few weeks ago, and said, saw the podcast, saw everything I was doing, and said, you know what, I think I need to rethink that book proposal.
Wow.
Yeah. So we don't know where it's going to go, but I want to just leave with this. I interviewed a beautiful chef recently for the podcast, a woman named Pascal. She's from Belgium. She was a former supermodel and she suffered with an eating disorder, and she wrote a cookbook. It's 7 years ago, she wrote a cookbook, and she handed it out to got rejected from every single publisher you can imagine in her country, all the big publishers. And she ended up going with this tiny, tiny little press, and they published her little cookbook. She has now sold 1.7 million copies of her. She's now on her 6th or 7th cookbook in 6 or 7 years. She is the largest grossing author, I think, in Belgium.
Wow.
One of her books just came out in the United States. And so I said, what did it do? What did this experience do? She's like, well, every time I fail, she just so simply in her beautiful little accent said, well, every time I fail, I just go home to my husband. I'm like, oh, if that didn't work out, I got rejected, but I learned something. What could I do differently next time?
Yeah.
So she's just
that's the key is learning from it. Yeah.
It's just revising. It's just a constant, life is about revision after revision after revision. And that's the writing process as well. And so I always think I'm in the midst of some kind of failure, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We all are, right?
Right. And if I wasn't, what would I be looking to achieve?
Sure.
Because all the billionaires I've ever spoken to and millionaires have said to me when they look back that the best times were actually building it. It wasn't when they actually got there.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe it. Focus on I always talk about focus on the process, not the outcome. So
I hate to say it, that cliche phrase, but it's about the journey.
Yes.
I hate to say it.
I know.
I hate the journey sometimes.
But it's the truth. But the journey is where we learn so much. We'll go, we'll wrap this up by coming right back to your experience as a swimmer. It wasn't the outcome, you didn't reach your goals, and I didn't reach my goals as a wrestler, really when it comes down to it. But it was that journey that we learn so much from.
Yeah.
It makes us
Wait,
better
Jim,
people.
one thing you didn't answer in the TED Talk before we hang up is, how did you win the last one? You don't answer that question.
So
you won the big, like your senior year, you won it. Like, but you don't even say like how you did it. Was it a mental thing in the end?
Yeah, in the end, it was just you know what it was, and I actually almost went this direction. I've never actually talked about this. I almost went this direction with the TED Talk because I'd worked with a speaking coach. All the TEDx speakers got assigned a speaking coach. It was a great experience, but I wanted to go this route, but I ended up changing directions a little bit. It was I ended up letting go of winning. That whole season was a totally transformative season for me, and I had more fun wrestling. And that was my 17th and final year of competing, and I had more fun that year than I ever had in my life, because at the end of that moment where my end of my junior year, I was in the locker room, found myself in the locker room with my face buried in a towel, in tears. The realization that happened over the off season was, you can't control the outcome, which goes back to what you said is you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And so I let go of my plans and just said, the plan, whatever happens, whatever happens at the end of the season is going to happen. And I just went out and wrestled with complete and pure freedom that year. And that actual match, was it was the pinnacle. I wrestled beyond that even. I mean, I just let go, and I competed so fiercely and so ferociously because I wanted to compete fiercely and ferociously. And that was it.
I have the chills. Like the hair is literally standing up on my arms, and I'm almost in tears listening to this, because it is if you can detach from the outcome. Yeah. And you can find that place of freedom and joy just in that moment of what you're doing. That is, like, I think one of the most beautiful soul expressions that an athlete can ever have. It was,
it was for me, and it was the culmination of successes and failures and learning and coaches and sports psychologists and all of this kind of, my mom and dad, everything's, that was invested in me, sort of coming together and teaching me this one lesson of let go of the process, let go of the outcome, focus on the process, and good things may or may not happen. Because I'll be honest, my very next, I still had to wrestle another match after that, and I got pinned for the first time in my college career. I got pinned. And that was the match that would have placed me high. I finished 8th. I could have finished higher had I won the next match. But so I went from this high to this low, and it was just this sort of juxtaposition of emotional experiences. But that's what I learned. The whole lesson there is what I now take and share with people, and I'm so thankful for it, because I've actually gone through similar experiences in my life, and that's what's actually led me to develop a program which I teach people now, and sort of help them get the clarity on their life that they need. So it was a great experience. I'm very thankful.
What an incredible character building experience, right? Yeah. To have as a young person.
Yes.
Well, this is awesome, Jim. It's been such a pleasure. Such a pleasure.
Likewise, Nell. It's been
40
great.
40 days, dude.
40 days. I can't believe you're going to make me do this. So by the time
come on. Every coach needs a coach.
You're right.
You can make me do something I don't want to do. How's that?
All right. So here's, so I was driving into work today, and I listened to something called the Success Hotline. And for the listeners, I've interviewed Dr. Rob Gilbert before, and he's done almost 10,000. Hold on. He did episode 33, if anybody wants to go back and find that. So Dr. Rob Gilbert, Success Hotline. You just Google it, and you'll find the phone number. Every day for since 1992, he's left a motivational message, voicemail. You can call in every single day. There's a new one. And Dr. Gilbert said, he did this last summer.
What's it called? It's called, what is it called?
Success Hotline.
Okay.
If you Google it, you'll find the number.
That's so cool.
And I have it saved as a contact on my phone. I just press it, and I listen to it, not every day, a few days a week on my drive to work. And it's kind of part of my sort of morning routine. But he did this last year. He did it this year today. Today was the first start of it for this summer as well. It's 98. It's a 98-day challenge. And you can take, I'm not going to you can take this or not take it, because this could be hard for some people. But, it's a 98-day challenge, 98 days of summer, starting now. I think it's either starting now through Labor Day or Memorial Day through Labor Day. But there's 98 days of summer, the way he calculates it. And basically his challenge is go 98 days without the 6 C's. It's like cake, candy, cookies, cola, and something else. There's like 6 C's, right? You have to go. So it's a 98-day challenge. Last year, my 98-day challenge was to do something nice and small and special for my wife 98 days in a row. I totally failed, but I got about 70 days in amongst the 98, but it was like 70 days that I wouldn't have. So anyway, that's, I'm going to put that out there for anybody who wants to take that challenge.
98 days, no C's. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I'm not going to put that one on you, but that's up to you. I'm going to try to find something else to do for that 98 days. Cause that's not like, those aren't vices of mine. So I'm not too worried about that, but find some other sort of 98-day challenge. Maybe it's meditation. So,
you know what I'm thinking is the other thing that people really swear by is a gratitude list at the end of every day.
Yeah. I've got the 5-minute journal. I just bought the 5-minute journal, which is.
Yeah. I might need to do 98 days of gratitude. I need to, it might change some stuff in my head. Yeah. Right?
Yep.
All right.
Amen.
All right. Cool. We got plans, dude.
This was great. Now, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for making time to come on the show. For the listeners, until next time, take the time to get clear on your goals and embrace failure as a stepping stone on your path to success.